The wind howled across the cracked earth, carrying the faint tang of ozone and rust. Elias crouched behind a jagged outcrop of what used to be a city wall, his fingers tracing the worn grip of his rifle. At 32 he was the oldest in their group by a decade, his face etched with lines from too many dust storms and not enough sleep. He peered through the scope, scanning the horizon where the sky bled orange into the endless plain. "See anything?" Lena whispered from beside him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She was the mechanic, all wiry muscle and quick fixes, her dark hair tied back with a strip of salvaged wire. At 24 she'd patched more engines than Elias had fingers, but today her toolkit felt useless against the vastness above. "Nothing yet," Elias replied, keeping his eyes on the clouds. They roiled unnaturally like oil on water, hinting at the storms that weren't storms at all. "But it's coming. Feel that hum." Lena nodded, pressing a palm to the ground. The vibration pulsed through the soil, a low thrum that set her teeth on edge. It had started 3 days ago, after the last raid on the old depot. They'd scavenged fuel cells and a crate of rations, enough to keep their rover running for weeks. But on the way back the sky had shifted. Not lightning, not thunder, just a tear, spilling fragments that glowed like dying stars. Behind them, in the shadow of the rover, Jax fiddled with the radio antenna. He was the youngest, barely 20, with a mop of sandy hair and a grin that hid his nerves. The scout of the group, always first to climb a ruin or spot a trail. "Static's worse than yesterday," he called softly, twisting a dial. "If I can boost the signal, maybe we'll pick up the others." Elias lowered the scope. "No time for maybes. We move at dusk, stick to the valleys." The plan was simple: skirt the Badlands to the survivor enclave at Ridgepoint, trade the fuel for meds and news. But the Skywatcher's warnings echoed in his mind, old tales from before the fall, when the fragments first rained down. Watch the sky or it watches you. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the rover's dented hull, Lena stood and stretched. She glanced at Elias, her eyes sharp. "You think it's them? The ones who dropped the bombs?" "Doesn't matter," Elias said, slinging his rifle. "What matters is we get through it." He helped Jack secure the antenna, the three of them working in the rhythm they'd honed over months of running. The hum grew louder, vibrating in their bones, and high above, a sliver of darkness pierced the clouds, like a crack in the world itself. Elias froze, pointing upward. "There. Watch it." Lena followed his gaze, her breath catching. The sliver widened just a hair, and something glinted within. A shard, tumbling end over end, trailing faint sparks. It wasn't falling straight, more like drifting, as if testing the wind. Jack's back toward the rover, his voice tight. "That's no meteor. It's searching." Inside now, Elias barked, shoving Lena ahead of him. They piled into the cab, the door sealing with a hiss. The engine roared to life under Lena's hands, gravel spitting as they accelerated into the fading light. In the rearview, the shard hung suspended, then dipped lower, following the curve of the horizon. They drove in silence for an hour, the rover bouncing over ruts that once were roads. Jax monitored the radio, static hissing like distant whispers. "No signals," he muttered. "But that thing, it's pacing us." Elias gripped the dash, eyes flicking between the windshield and the sky. The crack above had sealed, but the hum persisted, burrowing deeper. Lena pushed the rover harder, weaving through a cluster of skeletal towers, remnants of a factory district, their frames twisted like burned fingers. Then it happened. A jolt rocked the vehicle, not from the terrain but from above. The sky split again, closer this time, and fragments rained, not burning but cold, embedding in the ground with dull thuds. One struck the rover's roof, denting metal like a hammer blow. "Evade!" Elias shouted. Lena yanked the wheel, tires screeching as they swerved. Another fragment whistled past, cratering the earth beside them. Jax braced against the seat, scanning the mirrors. "It's hurting us," toward the open plain. The initial plan, to hug the valleys, crumbled as the fragments forced them straight into exposed ground. Elias chambered around, cracking the window for a shot, but the shards were too erratic, vanishing into the dust only to reappear. One clipped the rover's side, shearing off a mirror in a spray of glass. Sweat beaded on Lena's brow as she fought the controls. "Can't outrun it forever. We need cover, now." Jax pointed ahead, where a ravine cut the plain like a scar. "There. If we make it, we can lose it in the folds." Elias nodded, firing a burst skyward, not to hit, but to distract. The fragments scattered momentarily, buying seconds. The rover plunged into the ravine, engine straining as rocks clattered against the undercarriage. Darkness swallowed them, the hum fading to an echo. They didn't stop until the ravine bottomed out in a dry riverbed, hidden by overhanging ledges. Panting, they climbed out to check for damage. Lena traced the dents, her fingers lingering on a hairline crack in the fuel line. "We got lucky." Elena crouched behind the rusted bulkhead, her breath fogging the visor of her helmet. The hum of the settlement's generators vibrated through the metal floor, a constant reminder that power was finite. Beside her, Marcus fiddled with the makeshift scanner, his fingers, scarred from years of jury-rigging repairs, dancing over exposed wires. "Signal's weak," he muttered, his voice crackling over the comms. "But it's there. Something big inbound from Quadrant 3. She nodded, though he couldn't see it in the dim emergency lighting. The air recyclers wheezed, pulling in the faint metallic tang that always lingered after a storm. Outside, the sky was a bruised purple, swirling with clouds that hid the real threat. The debris field, remnants of the old orbital station shattered years ago. "Watch the sky," the elders always said, but watching did little when the fragments came screaming down like judgment. Kira's voice cut in from the outpost's edge, sharp and urgent. "Contacts visual. 3, no 4 pieces. Biggest one's the size of a shuttle. Impact in 7 minutes if it holds course." The cautious one, Kira, with her endless checklists and contingency plans, but even she couldn't map chaos like this. Elena pictured her out there, perched on the ridge, binoculars pressed to her face, wind whipping her suit. Elena pushed off the wall, grabbing the toolkit. "Marcus, boost the deflector array. We can't take another hit like last time." Last time had cost them the hydroponics bay, weeks of rations gone, mouths going hungry. The settlement, a cluster of prefab domes clinging to the valley floor, had already lost too much. They were down to core crew, her, the steady engineer, Marcus, the witty fixer who joked through fractures, and Kira, the scout whose caution had saved them more than once. He snorted, soldering a connection with a spark. "Boost it? With what prayers? The array's at 60%, one more overload and it's scrap." But his hands moved faster, rerouting power from non-essentials. Lights flickered in the corridor as he did, casting long shadows that danced like warnings. The ground trembled faintly, a precursor rumble. Elena felt it in her boots, a deep vibration that set her teeth on edge. She keyed her comm. "Kira, trajectory update. Can we evac the outer pods?" "Negative," Kira replied, her tone clipped, no room for debate. "Path's too wide. It'll shear the whole east flank. We divert the river barriers, maybe slow the smaller ones by time for the big fragment." Elena waited. The barriers were their water lifeline, painstakingly built from scavenged alloy to channel the seasonal floods. Sacrificing them meant drought risks come dry season, but survival now trumped tomorrow's thirst. "Do it. Marcus, you're with me on the array. Kira, start the diversion, blow the charges if you have to." As they scrambled toward the access hatch, Marcus quipped over the link, "If this works, drinks on me. If not, well, at least the sky won't complain." Elena almost smiled, but the first whistle pierced the air, a shard-slicing atmosphere too close already. They burst into the whipping wind, the purple sky fracturing with streaks of fire. The debris rained not in mercy but in fury. Alex wiped the sweat from his brow, the dim glow of the emergency lantern casting long shadows across the control room's cracked console. The air recyclers hummed unevenly, a constant reminder that their patchwork fixes were holding by threads thinner than spider silk. Sarah knelt beside the main panel, her fingers dancing over exposed wires, her cautious nature etched in the way she double-checked every connection before applying power. "Try it now," she said, voice steady but laced with the fatigue they all carried. Tom leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his witty grin absent for once as he scanned the corridor beyond. The settlement's outer hull groaned under another gust of wind-laced debris from the storms that never seemed to end. Alex flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, the fans whirred to life, pulling in the stale air and filtering out the metallic tang of dust that seeped through every seal. Then, a spark jumped and the system stuttered, coughing out a plume of acrid smoke. Sarah swore under her breath, yanking back her hand as if burned. "Damn it," Alex muttered, slamming a fist against the bulkhead. The vibration echoed through the narrow space, a futile echo of his frustration. Their plan to reroute power from the auxiliary batteries had seemed solid, clever, even scavenging parts from the wrecked scout ship they dragged in last week. But the corrosion from the endless acid rains had eaten deeper than they'd realized, turning a simple bypass into a gamble with loaded dice. Tom pushed off the wall, stepping closer. "Well, that's one way to add flavor to the air. Barbecue circuits, next on the menu." His attempt at levity fell flat, but it pulled a ghost of a smile from Sarah. She straightened, brushing soot from her sleeves, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the damage. "It's not just the wires," she said, pointing to the gauge. "Oxygen levels are dipping faster now. If we don't get this stable in the next hour, we'll be breathing our own exhaust by morning." The stakes hung unspoken. With the settlement's population down to 30 after the last raid, losing air meant losing lives, one shallow breath at a time. Alex nodded, mind racing through alternatives. The sky outside was a bruised purple, streaked with the fiery trails of falling debris, remnants of the orbital strikes that had shattered the old world. Venturing out now would be suicide, but staying put was no better. "We can't wait for the storm to break. Tom, you still got that drone working?" Tom's eyes lit up, the spark of ingenuity that had kept them alive this long. "Barely. Battery's low, but it can scout the ridge. Maybe spot a cleaner unit from one of the abandoned outposts." He didn't mention the risks. The drone signal could draw unwanted attention from the patrols that haunted the wastes, their sleek ships slicing through the clouds like predators. Sarah hesitated, her cautious instincts flaring. "And if it fails? We're blind out there, Alex. One wrong move and we're exposed." But she saw the resolve in his face, the same grit that had pulled them through the collapse of the city bunkers. With a sigh, she grabbed her toolkit. "Fine. But we rig a manual override first. No more surprises." As they worked, the room filled with the scrape of tools and murmured plans, the camaraderie a fragile shield against the encroaching dark. Outside, thunder rolled, but it was the silence between peals that chilled Alex most, the quiet before the sky decided to fall again. They had to move fast, or the advice etched into every survivor's mind would become their epitaph: watch the sky, always. The wind howled through the jagged spires of the canyon, carrying the faint, acrid tang of ionized air. Alex crouched low behind a cluster of petrified ferns, his fingers tracing the makeshift harness he'd rigged from salvaged cable and bone. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chill, and he wiped it away with the back of his glove, eyes flicking upward every few seconds. The sky above was a bruised swirl of purples and grays, the kind that promised more than just rain. "See anything?" Lena whispered from her vantage point 10 meters upslope, her voice tight but steady. She peered through the scope of their scavenged rifle, the one with the cracked lens that turned everything into a hazy dream. Her hands, usually so precise when stitching wounds or mixing rations, trembled just a fraction now. "Nothing yet," Alex replied, keeping his tone even. He wasn't one for false reassurance, but panic spread faster than any infection out here. Jax was down in the ravine below, scouting the wreckage of what might have been an old probe, or a trap. The witty scout had cracked a joke about it earlier, something about alien litter being the galaxy's worst yard sale, but even his humor had frayed at the edges since the last drop. A low rumble echoed from the east, vibrating through the rock like a distant drum. Alex's gut tightened. That wasn't thunder, it was the prelude. He signaled Lena with a quick hand wave, and she slid down to join him, her boots scraping softly against the loose gravel. "We need to move," she said, eyes on the horizon where the clouds thickened like clotting blood. "The readings from the beacon, it's pulling them right to us." The plan had been simple: retrieve the core from the probe, jury-rig it to boost their signal home. Earth Command had to be listening, had to be. But simplicity was a luxury they couldn't afford. Jax emerged from the shadows below, a slim figure hauling a dented canister that glinted under the fading light. "Jackpot," he called up, his voice carrying that forced levity. "But it's heavier than my ex's grudges. And it's humming, bad sign." Alex met him halfway, grabbing the other end of the canister. Together they lugged it up, muscles burning, breaths sinking in the thinning air. Lena covered their flank, rifle at the ready, her cautious nature making her scan every shadow. The hum from the core grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat that set Alex's teeth on edge. He'd seen schematics like this in the archives, alien tech designed to call in reinforcements, not send distress calls. Halfway to their makeshift camp, the sky cracked open. Not with lightning but with a tear, a shimmering rift that birthed the first of them. Sleek, winged shapes plummeted, no bigger than hawks but armored like tanks, their cries a shrill whine that pierced the wind. "Skywatchers." Jax spat, dropping his end of the canister to draw his pistol. The thing thudded to the ground, the hum spiking into a screech. Alex dove for cover, yanking Lena down with him as the first diver streaked past, claws raking the stone where Jax had stood. The scout rolled, firing twice, crack crack, and one wing shredded, sending the creature spiraling into the canyon wall with a wet smack. But more followed, a flock now, drawn by the Corps' unwitting beacon. Their plan, their hope of rescue, was bait. Shut it down. Lena yelled over the din, scrambling to the canister. Her fingers flew over the exposed panel, prying at seals with a multi-tool. Sparks flew as she worked, the air thickening with ozone. Alex fired his own sidearm, the recoil jarring his shoulder, clipping a diver mid-dive. It exploded in a spray of iridescent fluid, but the cost was immediate. His shots echoed, drawing even more from the rift. Jax was a blur, dodging and weaving, his wit reduced to grunts of effort. "These bastards learn fast," he muttered after blasting another, its body crumpling at his feet. But one grazed him, talons slicing through his jacket and into flesh. He staggered, blood blooming dark on the fabric, yet he pressed on, covering Lena's back. The Corps' screech peaked, and Lena slammed a fist into the override switch. Silence fell, abrupt as a guillotine, except for the remaining divers circling tighter, furious at the lost signal. Alex's heart pounded. They'd stopped the call, but the damage was done. The flock wouldn't forget. As the last of the rift sealed with a thunderous snap, the survivors huddled, the canister cold and inert between them. Jax leaned against the rock, pressing a hand to his wound, his face pale but eyes sharp. "Well, that backfired spectacularly. What's plan B, boss?" Alex glanced at the sky, now a roiling mass that seemed to watch them back. The cost lingered in the air, their signal silenced, Jax bleeding, and the canyon no longer a refuge but a cage. "We adapt," he said, helping Lena bind Jax's arm. "And we watch the damn sky." The wind howled through the jagged ruins of the old comm tower, carrying the faint tang of ozone from the last storm. Alex crouched behind a toppled girder, his breath steady despite the ache in his ribs from the previous day's scramble. Jordan fiddled with the jury-rigged scanner in her pack, her fingers smudged with grease, eyes narrowed against the dust devils swirling at their feet. Sam leaned against the metal, sharpening a makeshift blade from scavenged alloy, his usual quips silenced by the weight of what lay ahead. "Signal's faint," Jordan muttered, tapping the device. "But it's there. Base camp's what, 10 clicks north? If we push now before the cycle hits." Alex nodded, scanning the horizon where the sky bruised purple, heavy with the promise of descent. The fragments came without warning most times, but the patterns were etched in every survivor's mind. Every 18 hours the veil thinned and the sky wept fire. They'd lost Riley to it 2 cycles back, a split-second lapse in vigilance. "Watch the sky," the elders whispered as if it were gospel. Alex had etched it into his forearm with a heated wire, a reminder that burned deeper than skin. Sam sheathed the blade and stood, stretching his lanky frame. 10 clicks of open ground? That's a gauntlet. Remember the ravine last time? One wrong step and we're paced. "We adapt," Alex said, his voice low but firm. He'd always been the one to charge forward, the grit that kept them moving when caution screamed retreat. Jordan, ever the counterweight, shot him a look but said nothing. Her plans were their lifeline even if they chafed against his impatience. They set out at dawn's fragile light, skirting the crumbled highway where vines choked the asphalt like veins. Jordan led, her scanner beeping softly, mapping a path through the debris fields. The air grew thicker, humming with static that raised the hairs on their necks. Sam trailed, eyes flicking upward every few steps, his wit surfacing in a dry comment about the sky's mood swings. Halfway across the flats, the first rumble echoed, not thunder but the deep groan of atmosphere protesting intrusion. Alex froze, hand raised. "Cycle's early." Jordan checked her device, face paling. "By an hour." Damn interference, must be the tower's echo messing with the read. They bolted for a cluster of upturned cargo pods, rusted hulks from the before times. Sam reached it first, wedging open a seam with his blade. And now, it's a bunker till it passes. Inside, the pod reeked of mildew and old oil, but the walls held firm. They huddled as the sky ignited, streaks of orange slashing the view through a cracked porthole. Fragments whistled, one slamming nearby with a cratering thud that shook dirt from the ceiling. Alex gripped his knife, counting the impacts, 3, 7, a dozen. Each one a reminder of the cost. The world shattered when the swarm hit, orbital junk turned lethal rain, and humanity's remnants scattered like ash. Jordan pulled out her toolkit, sketching a new route on a scrap of foil. "We can't wait it out every time. If we loop east, hit the ridge," a sharper crack split the air, closer. The pod lurched, metal groaning as a glancing hit buckled the side. Sam cursed, shoving a brace into the breach. "That's our cue. Plan's shot, ridge is exposed." Alex met Jordan's eyes, seeing the flicker of doubt she rarely showed. Her caution had saved them before, but now it warred with the ticking clock. We go through the flats, he decided. Fast and low. Trust the gaps. She hesitated, then nodded, sealing the sketch away. Grit overrode fear. That was their bond, forged in losses too raw to name. As the barrage peaked, they slipped out into the fading fury, weaving between smoldering pits. Sam's blade caught a glint from above, deflecting a pebble-sized shard that would have shredded an ankle. Sky's got eyes, he grunted but pressed on. By the time they crested the far rise, the cycle ebbed, leaving scorched earth and a sky clearing to indifferent blue. Base camp's faint lights winked in the distance, but Alex's gaze lingered upward, the warning etched eternal. They'd made it, but the cost lingered in bruised bodies and a scanner now cracked beyond repair. Jordan's hands shook as she packed it away, not from fear but the knowledge that next time adaptation might not be enough. Ilara crouched behind the rusted hull of an overturned truck, her breath steady despite the knot in her stomach. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and ozone, a reminder that the storm had passed but the real threats lingered above. Jax knelt beside her, his fingers tracing the makeshift map scratched into the dirt, lines marking safe paths through the skeletal remains of the old city. This alley should give us cover, he muttered, his voice low and edged with that familiar grit. 15 minutes to the warehouse, grab what we can and back before the patrol cycle. She nodded, glancing at Mira, who clutched the scavenged pulse rifle like it was an extension of her arm. The younger woman's eyes darted skyward every few seconds, a habit born from too many close calls. You sure about the timing? Mira whispered, her caution threading through the words. Last time we cut it fine, those shadows dropped like rain. Jax's lips quirked in a half-smile, the witty spark in his eyes undimmed by the scars crisscrossing his face. That's why I'm timing it. Human clocks beat their algorithms every time. He was the engineer of their ragged trio, the one who jury-rigged generators from scrap and turned whispers of hope into flickering lights back at the bunker. Ilara, their unspoken leader, felt the weight of his confidence like a shield, but she knew better than to lean on it fully. 3 years since the skies tore open, and trust was a luxury they rationed like clean water. They moved as one, slipping from shadow to shadow along the fractured pavement. The city sprawled like a graveyard of steel and concrete, vines clawing up the sides of crumbling towers under a sky that brooded gray and watchful. Ilara led, her boots silent on the grit, senses tuned to the faint hum that always preceded trouble. The warehouse loomed ahead, its doors yawning open like a forgotten mouth, promising salvage, batteries, wire, anything to keep their hidden lights burning. Inside, the air cooled, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light piercing the roof. Jax wasted no time, prying open crates with a crowbar that sang against the wood. Jackpot, he breathed, pulling out coils of insulated cable. Mira covered the entrance, her rifle trained on the gap, while Ilara scanned the deeper shadows. That's when she heard it, a low vibration not from the ground but thrumming through the air itself. Jax, she hissed, freezing. The hum grew, a swarm's whisper building to a roar. He looked up, cables draped over his shoulder. Too early. We planned for. The roof exploded inward. Debris rained down in a cascade of splintered beams and shattered tiles, jagged metal claws slicing through the gloom like predatory fingers. Drones, sleek and unrelenting, poured in from the breach, not the scouting kind but the hunter variants, their sensors glowing crimson as they locked onto the intruders. Mira fired first, the pulse rifle's crack echoing as blue energy lanced out, shattering one drone mid-dive. But there were too many. Ilara shoved Jax behind a toppled shelf, her own sidearm barking in rapid bursts. Back door. Now. Shards of drone carapace peppered the floor, sparks flying like dying fireflies, but for every one they felled, 2 more buzzed closer, their wings a blurring storm. Jax scrambled, grabbing a loose pipe from the debris. The EMP trap, it's not ready. His plan, so meticulously laid in the bunker's dim glow, backfired spectacularly. They'd rigged a decoy signal to lure scouts away, but the hunters had adapted, their algorithm sniffing out the human scent beneath the ruse. A drone skimmed low, its claw grazing Myra's arm, drawing a sharp cry as blood welled through her sleeve. Ilara's heart pounded, the tension coiling like a spring. She fired again, clipping a wing, but the machine veered and retaliated with a stun pulse that numbed her fingers. They retreated in chaos, Jax hauling Mira while Ilara covered their flank. The warehouse became a gauntlet of ricochets and whirring death, the initial salvage forgotten in the scramble for survival. They burst through the back door into a narrow alley, the drones hot on their trail. The sky above cracked open with their pursuers' lights, piercing the overcast like accusatory stars. "Watch the sky." Mira gasped, the old mantra slipping out as she clutched her wound. Ilara pulled her along, mind racing for an adaptation. The drainage grate 50 meters ahead, half buried but wide enough. "There," she pointed, voice steady amid the panic. "Down and under." Jax nodded, his wits surfacing in the grit. "Humans don't fly, we burrow." He kicked the grate loose just as the first drone crested the alley wall, its shadow falling long and lethal. They tumbled into the muck-slick tunnel below, the cover slamming shut as pulses scorched the bars above. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by the faint glow of their emergency strips. But the hum faded, the hunters confused by the sudden vanishing act. Panting in the fetid confines, Ilara bound Myra's arm with a strip of cable insulation, the sting of failure mixing with relief. They'd lost the haul, and Myra's injury would slow them, a tangible cost etched in blood and strained breaths. But they'd adapted, turned the city's veins against the sky. As they pushed deeper into the underground, the weight of the watch pressed heavier. Next time the hunters might learn to dive. The wind howled through the jagged ruins of the old comm tower, carrying flecks of ash that stung like needles. Elena crouched low behind a rusted panel, her breath steady despite the ache in her side from the earlier fall. Beside her, Marcus fiddled with the makeshift scanner, his fingers blackened from soot, eyes narrowed in concentration. "Signal's faint," he muttered, twisting a wire. "But it's there." Like a whisper from the other side of the storm. Lila peered over the edge, her scope trained on the horizon where the sky churned in bruised purples and blacks. The Watchers, those colossal iridescent beasts that patrolled the upper atmosphere, wheeled in lazy circles, their shadows rippling across the fractured earth below. One dipped lower, its membrane wings catching the dim light, and she ducked back, heart pounding. "They're closer today. Whatever's calling us, it's drawing them in." Elena nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. The plan had been simple. Salvage the tower's antenna to boost their distress beacon, reach the enclave rumored to be holding out in the northern wastes. But the ascent had gone wrong fast. A loose beam had given way, sending Marcus tumbling and cracking Elena's ribs. Now, with the tower groaning under fresh gusts, doubt gnawed at them. "We push on," she said, voice firm. "Or we die scattered like the rest." Marcus straightened, the scanner beeping softly. "Got it?" Coordinates lock in, about 50 clicks north, but the paths choked with debris fields. He glanced at Lila, who was already sketching a route on her battered tablet, lines sharp and deliberate. Her caution had saved them before, mapping safe windows between the Watchers' dives. "We can't go straight," she said. "Skirt the ravine, use the old rail line for cover. But if one spots us..." They moved as one, Elena leading with her pry bar gripped like a talisman, Marcus hauling the antenna fragments in a sling across his back. The descent was treacherous, metal screeching under their boots, the air thick with the metallic tang of ozone. Halfway down, a shadow passed overhead, too close, too silent. They froze, pressed flat against the tower's frame, as the Watcher's cry echoed like tearing silk. It veered away, but the ground trembled faintly in its wake, a reminder of the quakes it could summon. At the base, they paused in the shadow of a toppled satellite dish, now a makeshift shelter. Elena leaned against it, catching her breath, while Marcus tested the beacon. Static crackled, then a burst of clarity, fragmented voices, human, pleading for aid. "It's real," he said, a grin breaking through the grime on his face. "The Enclave's broadcasting." Lila's eyes lit up, but her hand tightened on the scope. "Then we run. Before the sky notices." They set off along the rail line, the tracks warped but intact, weaving through skeletal forests of rebar and vine-choked concrete. The sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in fiery streaks, and for a moment, the world felt almost survivable, three figures against the vast, unforgiving expanse, bound by grit and the faint hope of voices on the wind. But as dusk deepened, the first rumble came from the east. Not thunder but something mechanical grinding through the earth. Elena halted, signaling the others down. Through the haze, shapes emerged. A rival band, scavengers from the southern pits, their vehicles cobbled from tank treads and scrap armor. They were hunting the same signal, faces hardened under respirators, weapons glinting. "They'll cut us off," Marcus whispered, scanner clutched tight. Lila scanned the sky, then the ground. "We don't fight. We divert them." Her mind raced, piecing together the terrain, the ravine nearby, swollen with runoff from the last acid rain. Elena caught her drift. "Lure them in. Use the beacon's echo." Marcus jury-rigged a decoy pulse, faint but directional, aiming it toward the ravine's edge. The scavengers veered, engines roaring, dust billowing in their wake. The trio slipped into a side gully, hearts hammering, as the rumble faded into splashes and curses from the ravine below. One wrong turn, and the watchers above might have joined the fray. They pressed on, the beacon's true signal guiding them, but Elena felt the weight of it now, the cost of every shadow dodged, every plan bent but unbroken. The sky watched, patient and vast, but so did they. The wind howled through the jagged ruins of the old warehouse district, carrying the faint, acrid tang of scorched metal. Elias crouched behind a toppled shipping container, his breath steady despite the knot in his stomach. The sky above churned with bruised clouds, but it was the clear patches that worried him most. Those were where the fractures appeared, silent rifts that birthed the shards without warning. He'd seen one tear open just yesterday, spilling debris like a cosmic garbage dump, pulverizing a whole block in seconds. "Keep low," he whispered over the comms, his voice a gravelly anchor for the team. Beside him, Mara fiddled with the jury-rigged scanner in her pack, her fingers nimble but her eyes darting upward every few seconds. She was the cautious one, always calculating odds, but today her wit had sharpened into something edged with frustration. "This thing's picking up interference. If we don't get a clean read soon, we're blind out here." Behind them, Jax hefted the salvage crate they'd already half filled with wiring and fuel cells, his broad shoulders straining under the weight. The big man was all grit, no complaints, but even he glanced at the sky now and then, his free hand twitching toward the pulse rifle slung across his back. "Just say the word, Eli. We grab what we can and bolt. Ain't no point dancing with those rifts." Elias nodded, peering around the container's edge. The target building loomed 50 meters away, a squat admin block that scans suggested held intact solar arrays. They needed those panels to power the settlement's water purifiers. Without them, the filters would fail in days, and thirst would claim more lives than any skyfall. But the open ground between them and the building was a kill zone, littered with twisted rebar and exposed to the heavens. A low rumble echoed from above, not thunder but something deeper like the groan of bending space. Mara's scanner beeped urgently. "Incoming fluctuation. Rift probability spiking. Get down." They flattened against the container as the air thickened, a shimmering line etching across the sky like a knife wound. It widened slowly at first, then with a crack that vibrated through their bones, vomiting a cascade of glittering fragments. Chunks of what might have been asteroid or wreckage tumbling end over end. One piece, the size of a car, slammed into the ground 30 meters off, erupting in a plume of dust and shrapnel that peppered their cover. Elias shielded his eyes, coughing. That was close. Too close. He risked a look. The rift was sealing already, but the debris field had shifted, blocking their direct path. The admin block was still visible, but now flanked by fresh hazards. A crater smoking where the large chunk had landed, and smaller shards scattered like lethal caltrops. Mara wiped grit from her face, her expression tight. "Plan B then?" "We can't charge straight in. Circle wide, use the alley on the left. It's got those overhangs from the old rail yard. Might shield us if another one hits." Jax grunted, adjusting the crate. "Overhangs won't stop a big one. But yeah, better than nothing. You lead, Eli." Elias took a breath, the weight of their dwindling supplies pressing on him like the sky itself. Back at the settlement, Lena, the fourth of their core group, the one who'd stayed behind to coordinate, had drilled the rule into everyone: watch the sky. It was all they had left from the first waves, when the fractures started appearing without pattern or mercy. No one knew if they were natural alien sabotage or some glitch in reality, but ignoring them meant death. He signaled forward, and they moved in a tight knot, boots crunching softly over rubble. The alley narrowed quickly, walls of corroded steel rising on either side, remnants of freight cars long derailed. Elias kept his pace measured, eyes flicking between the ground and the sliver of sky visible overhead. Mara stayed close, scanner humming faintly, while Jax brought up the rear, his rifle at the ready, not for threats on the ground but for the slim hope of blasting away a falling shard if it came to that. Halfway through, the scanner chirped again. "Another blip," Mara hissed. "Smaller but vectoring this way. We need cover, now." Elias spotted a half-collapsed car frame, its roof bent but solid. "There. Pile in." They dove under it just as the rift's whisper grew to a roar. This one was minor, spitting fist-sized rocks that rattled against the metal above like hail from hell. One skipped off the edge and clanged against Jax's crate, denting the lid. He cursed under his breath but held steady. The barrage lasted seconds, then silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing. Elias pushed out first, scanning the now clearer path to the admin block. "We're through the worst." Let's make this count. Inside the building the air was stale, lit by slivers of light through cracked windows. They worked fast, Mara hot-wiring the door panels, Elias prying open storage lockers, Jax hauling out the solar arrays one by one. The components were heavier than expected, caked in dust but miraculously intact. No corrosion from the exposure. Jackpot, Jax muttered, stacking the last one. This'll keep the purifiers humming for months. But as they turned to leave, Mara's scanner wailed, a sustained tone, not a blip. She paled. Major rift forming. Right over us. It's not closing. Elias froze, staring at the ceiling as if he could see through it. The building groaned, a fine powder sifting from the joints. Outside, the sky was fracturing wide. A maw belching Elara wiped the sweat from her brow, her fingers leaving a streak of dust across her skin. The canyon walls loomed like jagged teeth, swallowing the midday sun and casting long shadows that danced with every gust of wind. She crouched behind a boulder, her breath steady despite the ache in her legs from the climb. Below, the ravine twisted like a scar on the earth's face, and that's where Marcus was, sliding down the loose scree toward the makeshift bridge they'd rigged from salvaged cables and splintered timber. Keep low, she whispered into the comms unit strapped to her wrist, the static crackle barely masking her worry. Marcus didn't respond, but she saw him duck as a shadow flickered overhead. The skies were clear now, but they both knew better. Watch the sky, the old survivors always said, a mantra etched into every human heart left on this forsaken rock. It had saved them more times than she could count, ever since the first dropships tore through the atmosphere like vengeful gods. He reached the bridge, testing its weight with a cautious foot. The structure groaned under him, cables humming like taut bowstrings. Elara's grip tightened on her rifle, the metal warm from the sun. They'd come this far chasing the signal, a faint pulse from what might be the last orbital relay, a chance to call for help from whoever was left out there. But the drones had found them at dawn, sleek predators with iridescent wings that hummed a deadly lullaby. One had clipped their rover, sending it tumbling into the abyss, and now resources were thinner than ever. Water for 2 days, ammo for one skirmish if they were lucky. A sharp ping echoed through the comms. Got eyes on it, Marcus said, his voice low and edged with that wry humor he clung to like a shield. Relays intact, but the access panels fused. Need the torch from your pack. He was brave like that, always volunteering for the exposed spots, but Elara could hear the strain, the way his words clipped at the ends like he was holding back a cough from the dust. She scanned the rim above, her eyes tracing the thin blue ribbon of sky. Nothing yet. But the air felt heavier, charged, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Copy. On my way. Hold position. Slinging her pack, she edged down the slope, rocks skittering under her boots like fleeing insects. The canyon amplified every sound, turning her steps into thunderclaps. By the time she reached him, Marcus was kneeling by the relay, his gloved hands prying at the panel with a multi-tool. Hand it over, he said without looking up, and she passed the plasma torch, its blue flame igniting with a hiss. Sparks flew as he cut through the metal, illuminating the grime on his face, streaks of blood from a shallow gash above his eye. Drones nicked me earlier. Nothing major. Liar, Elara muttered, positioning herself to cover him, rifle trained upward. She was the cautious one, the planner, always mapping 3 escapes before committing to one path. Marcus balanced her with his grit, charging ahead where she hesitated. Together they'd outrun patrols, scavenged ruins, and kept Lena alive through the worst of it. Speaking of which, Lena status? The girl's voice crackled back, faint from her perch higher up the ridge. At 16 she was all sharp edges and quiet determination, the youngest but often the steadiest. Clear here. But I saw movement, north side maybe half a click. Could be scavengers or worse. Elara's stomach tightened. Scavengers were human, desperate like them, but alliances frayed fast in the wastes. Worse would be the automated hunters, those skyborne sentinels that enforced the quarantine. The relay was their shot at breaking it, at broadcasting a distress call that might pierce the blockade. But if it failed? The torch sputtered out and Marcus swore under his breath. Panels clear. Wiring's a mess. Looks like a surge fried half the circuits. He pulled out a bundle of exposed cables, his fingers deft despite the gloves. Elara watched him work, the way he twisted and spliced with the focus of a surgeon, human ingenuity turning scrap into salvation. But then, a low whine pierced the air, growing from a distant buzz to a roar. Sky. Lena shouted over the comms. Elara spun, heart slamming against her ribs. There, cresting the canyon lip, 3 drones descended like falcons on the hunt, their underbellies glowing with targeting lights. Red beams swept the ground, locking on the relay's faint energy signature. Marcus, move. She fired first, the rifle's recoil jarring her shoulder. A bolt lanced out, grazing the lead drone's wing. It wobbled but corrected, retaliating with a barrage of micromissiles that exploded against the far wall, showering them in debris. He dropped the wires, grabbing his own weapon, a scavenged pulse rifle that spat erratic bursts. Lena flanked him from above. They fired in tandem, bolts crisscrossing the air like deadly fireworks. One drone shattered mid-dive, raining shards into the ravine, but the others adapted, splitting formation to encircle. Ilara's clip ran dry with a click. She ducked as a missile scorched the bridge, cables snapping like whips. Marcus yanked her back, the two of them tumbling onto solid ground just as the structure buckled, plunging into the depths. Plan B, he gasped, eyes meeting hers in the chaos. Fear there but trust too. We draw a manual, you rig the overload. She nodded, already pulling the detonator pack. The wind howled through the jagged ruins of the old launch tower, carrying flecks of ash that stung like needles against exposed skin. Elias crouched low behind a crumpled bulkhead, his breath steady despite the ache in his ribs from the fall earlier. Beside him, Mira scanned the horizon with her makeshift periscope, a scavenged lens wrapped in duct tape and wire, her fingers white-knuckled around the grip. They're circling again, she whispered, her voice tight but even. 3 of them low over the valley. If we move now, we might slip under their blind spot. Jax, ever the skeptic, shook his head from his spot wedged into a crevice, fiddling with the detonator in his lap. His hands, scarred from too many close calls, moved with deliberate care, twisting wires that sparked faintly in the dim light. Blind spot? Those skimmers don't have blind spots. They have appetites. He glanced at Elias, his eyes sharp under the brim of his battered cap. You sure about this plan? Last time we trusted the shadows, Lena didn't make it back. Elias felt the weight of that name like a stone in his gut, but he pushed it down, focusing on the map etched into the dirt at his feet. The tower's shadow stretched long toward the ravine, a narrow path that could lead them to the hidden cache if they timed it right. The sky above churned with the perpetual storm that had swallowed the world, but it was the things that rode its currents, the swarm-like drones of the invaders, that truly watched. Humans had learned that lesson the hard way: look up or die blind. We adapt or we fade, Elias said, meeting Jax's gaze. The cache has the parts we need for the signal booster. Without it, we're just ghosts yelling into the void. Mira lowered the periscope, her face smudged with grease and resolve. She was the quiet one, the mapper who saw patterns where others saw chaos, and right now her caution warred with necessity. Winds shifting east. It'll mask our scent for maybe 10 minutes. But if one peels off... She trailed off, slinging the device over her shoulder and checking the straps on her pack. Inside rattled the few tools they'd salvaged: a fusion welder, depleted batteries, and the half-assembled emitter that could pierce the interference if they reached the relay point. Jax snorted, but there was no real bite in it. He pocketed the detonator and hefted his rifle, a relic pieced together from pre-fall tech and alien scrap. Fine. But I'm setting the decoy charges on the ridge. Drum like flies to honey. He clapped Elias on the shoulder, a rare gesture of trust, and slipped out first, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd outrun death more times than he could count. They waited, hearts pounding in sync with the distant hum growing louder. Elias pictured the swarm, sleek iridescent hulls that darted like predatory birds, their sensors sniffing for heat and movement. The invaders had come from the stars, not with thunderous fleets but with a subtle infestation, turning Earth's atmosphere into their hunting ground. Cities fell not to bombs but to the endless patrols that picked off survivors one by one. But humans endured, burrowing, innovating, whispering warnings like "watch the sky" around flickering campfires. Now, Mira hissed as Jax's charges bloomed in the distance, a series of muffled pops that lit the ridge in brief, deceptive flares. The hum shifted, veering away. Elias bolted after her, legs burning as they dashed across the open ground, the ravine's edge yawning before them like a promise. Loose gravel skittered underfoot, and he grabbed Myra's arm to steady her when she stumbled, pulling her along without breaking stride. Halfway down the slope, the air split with a shrill whine. One of the skimmers had broken formation, its shadow slicing across the path like a blade. Elias shoved Mira behind a boulder, diving after her as energy bolts scorched the earth where they'd been. The thing hovered 20 meters up, its underbelly pulsing with scanning lights that painted the ravine in eerie blue. Jax's voice crackled over the comms, faint through the static. Holding position. You two haul ass, it's locking on. Myra's hand found the emitter prototype in her pack, her mind racing through contingencies. The ravine's echo chamber, she said, voice barely above the roar in his ears. If we trigger a slide here, it might confuse its sensors long enough to drop us out of range. Elias nodded, spotting the unstable ledge above, a remnant of some ancient quake piled with debris. He yanked a flare from his belt, the kind meant for signaling but weaponized now, and lobbed it upward with all his strength. The flare arced, bursting in a shower of red that reflected off the skimmer's hull. The drone jerked, firing wildly as its systems glitched, bolts ricocheting off rocks and sending tremors through the ground. Elias and Mira scrambled, kicking loose stones that started a cascade. The slide gained momentum, a rumbling wave of dirt and boulders that buried the path behind them and forced the skimmer higher, its whine dopplering into frustration. They hit the ravine floor rolling, bruised but alive, the cache entrance just visible through the dust, a camouflaged hatch half buried in vines. Jax's voice cut through again, clear. But they're regrouping. We've got maybe an hour before the whole flock descends. Elias pried the hatch open, the hinges groaning like old bones, and they tumbled inside. The air was cool, stale with the scent of rust and forgotten tech. Mira lit her headlamp, revealing crates stamped with faded UN logos. Alara gripped the makeshift harness tighter, her knuckles whitening against the rough weave of salvaged netting. The wind howled through the canyon walls, carrying the faint, ominous rumble that had become their constant companion. Below, the rover's treads churned against loose gravel, kicking up dust that swirled like ghosts in the fading light. Jax hunched over the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Mira scanned the horizon with the battered scope, her breath steady despite the tremor in her hands. They're closing in, Mira said, voice low and clipped. She lowered the scope, her eyes meeting Alara's. 3 vectors all from above. If we don't hit that ridge in the next 5 minutes, we're pinned. Jax didn't look up, his fingers dancing across the patched console. Ridge it is. Hold on, rerouting power to the forward shields. That last pulse from the swarm fried half our emitters. The rover lurched as he pushed the throttle, the engine groaning in protest. Ilara felt the vibration rattle through her bones, a reminder of how far they'd stretched this old rig since the fall. She nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. The Skywatchers, those eerie drones that patrolled the upper atmosphere, had been relentless since the breach. One wrong move, one shadow too long, and they'd rain down fire that could vaporize a convoy in seconds. Their group had dwindled from a dozen to 3, each lost a scar. Tomas vaporized mid-transmission, Lena caught in a collapse they couldn't outrun. Now, with the last cache of fuel cells on the line, failure meant not just death, but the end of any hope for the outposts beyond the waste. The canyon narrowed, walls rising like jagged teeth. Ilara leaned out, signaling Jax to weave left around a boulder cluster. There, that fissure. If we jam the rover in, we might mask our heat signature. Her words came quick, born of the grit that had kept them alive. Always adapt, never freeze. Mira shook her head, but there was no argument in it, just the weary resolve of someone who'd seen too many plans shatter. Worth a shot. But if they triangulate, we're sitting ducks. She clipped her harness and grabbed the EMP launcher, its charge indicator flickering at half power. Jax swung the rover hard, metal screeching as they scraped into the crevice. The walls closed around them, muffling the wind, but the rumble grew louder, vibrating the air. Ilara's heart pounded as she powered up the secondary scanner, its screen blooming with red blips descending like predatory birds. 2 minutes. Jax, kill the engine, go cold. He complied, the sudden silence deafening. They waited, breaths held, the only sound the distant whine of the swarm piercing the rock. Then it came, a shadow passed overhead, swift and silent. Mira tensed, launcher raised. One's breaking off. Coming straight for us. Ilara's mind raced. The drones adapted, learned from each evasion. Their last trick with the decoy flares had bought them hours, but now? She spotted a loose panel on the rover's undercarriage, an idea sparking. Mira, vent the exhaust vents manually, flood the fissure with hot air from below. It'll look like geothermal activity, not us. Mira hesitated a fraction, then moved, prying the panel with a tool from her belt. Steam hissed out, billowing upward in a deceptive plume. Jax whispered, clever. If it fools the thermal scan. The drone hovered, its scan beams slicing through the mist, inches from their hiding spot. Ilara held her breath, the weight of the sky pressing down. The beam lingered, then withdrew. The drone banked away, rejoining the swarm. Relief washed over them, but it was fleeting. Mira sealed the panel, her face streaked with grime. That bought us time, but the ridge is still a hike. And the cache, if the swarm circles back. We push, Ilara said, unclipping her harness. Together. Like always. Jax restarted the engine softly, and they emerged into the twilight, the canyon stretching toward the distant glow of the ridge. But as they crested a rise, a new rumble echoed, not from above but from the ground itself. Cracks spiderwebbed the earth ahead, the quake triggered by the swarm's earlier passes. The rover skidded, teetering on the edge of a widening chasm. Jax yanked the wheel but momentum betrayed them. Brace. The vehicle tipped, plunging into the rift. Ilara lunged for the emergency tether, firing it into the canyon wall. It caught with a metallic thunk, halting their fall just short of the abyss. Dangling in the harnesses, they swayed, the rover groaning below, half buried in rubble. Mira coughed, wiping dust from her eyes. Cache is gone. Fuel cells with it. Her voice cracked, the first real fracture in her caution. Ilara met her gaze, the sting of loss sharp but not breaking. Then we improvise. We've got each other, and the sky's clear for now. Jax grunted agreement, already calculating their climb. The rumble faded, but the cost lingered. No fuel meant no return, only forward into the unknown. As they began the ascent, hand over hand, Ilara glanced up. The stars emerged, watchful and indifferent, a reminder etched in every survivor's whisper. Watch the sky. The hum of the makeshift generator filled the dim cavern, a steady thrum that matched the pulse in Elena's temples. She crouched by the control panel, fingers slick with sweat as she twisted the final wire into place. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and damp earth, the walls closing in like the weight of everything they'd lost. Outside, the sky rumbled, a low growl that promised the swarm's return. They had maybe minutes. Talk to me, Elena. Raj's voice cut through the noise, steady but edged with the strain of holding the collapsed tunnel entrance shut. His arms trembled against the makeshift brace of rebar and stone, muscles bulging under his torn jacket. The cautious one, always calculating risks, but now he was the anchor keeping the ceiling from burying them all. It's holding, she replied, not looking up. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd rewired a dozen traps in the last week alone. Ingenious patches born from scavenged drone parts and sheer desperation. Brave didn't cover it. Elena was the fire that kept them moving when logic screamed to hide. But if that surge hits without this grounded, it'll fry us like the others. Mia paced the narrow space behind them, her wit sharpened to a blade in moments like this. Fry us? Darling, we've danced with worse. Remember the ridge? I jury-rigged that EMP from a toaster and a car battery. She glanced at Jordan, who knelt nearby, bandaging a gash on his own leg with strips from his fading med kit. The medic's face was pale, his cautious optimism frayed after losing their fourth, Tom, to the last aerial sweep. We adapt or we become fertilizer. You're called Doc, patch and pray or help Elena. Jordan tied off the knot with a wince, his eyes flicking to the faint glow of the cavern's single bulb. I'm in. But if this backfires, we're done. No more second chances. He shuffled over, handing Elena a stripped cable from his pack. Resource shortage had hit them hardest here. No more hoarding, every scrap counted. The swarm's blockades had choked off supply lines, forcing this desperate push to the old bunker network below the ruins. The ground shuddered. Dust sifted from the cracks above, and the rumble grew to a roar. Raj grunted, shoving harder against the brace. They're here. Early. Elena, now. She slammed the panel shut, flipping the switch. Sparks flew, a brief constellation in the gloom, and the generator whined higher. Outside, the sky lit up, those unnatural veins of purple energy cracking through the clouds, the swarm's harvesters descending like vultures on a corpse. But the air crackled differently this time. Elena's rig pulsed, channeling the raw output into a web of buried conduits they'd laid over the past days. Not enough for a full blast, but a clever redirect, funneling the swarm's own interference waves back at them. Come on, you bastards, Mia muttered, peering through a sliver of light at the tunnel mouth. She clutched the detonator for their fallback charges, the ones that would seal them in if the skies won. The first harvester breached the cavern's mouth, its thrusters scorching the stone, tendrils whipping out to probe the darkness. Raj roared, kicking a loose rock into its path, distraction enough to buy seconds. Jordan lunged, jamming a metal rod into a joint on its underbelly, twisting with all his weight. The machine screeched, metal grinding, but it pressed on. Elena's device hummed to life. A surge ripped through the conduits, invisible lightning arcing upward. The harvester froze, its lights flickering, then convulsed as the feedback loop hit. Purple veins burst along its hull, and it plummeted, crashing into the tunnel wall with a thunderous crack. Raj dove aside just in time, the brace splintering under the impact. More followed, 3, 4, but the chain reaction spread. The sky above fractured with erratic bursts, the swarm's formation unraveling as their own signals turned against them. Mia whooped, hitting the secondary switch to amplify the pulse. That's it. Human grit versus alien arrogance. Guess who wins? Elena sagged against the panel, breath ragged. The roar faded to echoes, the sky clearing to a bruised dusk. They emerged into the open, stepping over the smoking wreckage. The bunker entrance yawned ahead, a promise of shelter, but the cost lingered. Raja's arm hung limp, Jordan's leg wound seeping anew, and Mia's eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful. "Watch the sky," Raj said softly, echoing the mantra as they descended. It wasn't over, the swarm would adapt, return stronger. But for now they'd carved out survival with wire and will, a testament etched in scars. The stars peeked through, indifferent witnesses to their earned breath.